Some of America's founding fathers were centralizers, men like Alexander Hamilton and John Adams, but these were vigorously opposed by those who fear the powerful federal government. Senator Mike Lee of Utah focuses on these figures in his new book, Written Out of History, The Forgotten Founders Who Fought Big Government. He spoke with Kevin Cirilli.
I love the Canasatego story because it's really the story of America. Benjamin Franklin met Canasatego, this Iroquois Indian chief from the Onondaga tribe, in 1744 at a conference in Albany. And Canasatego taught Benjamin Franklin about how the Iroquois nation operated. These tribes came together. They continued to govern themselves locally, but they operated as one nation for purposes of defending themselves. This worked. It worked well. And eventually Franklin started seeing this as a potential model for American governance, which by the time of the Constitutional Convention, it became.
And many people don't think of the Native American influence on our founding fathers, which is something that this book gets at, which is there's a lot of people who are written out of history who had a lot of influence on some of these founding fathers. And when Ben Franklin came back, he was coming back from London after serving as a diplomat. So put this through the prism of today's senator, where President Trump is negotiating a bunch of foreign policy treaties, most notably, obviously, with Singapore. What can he learn, perhaps, from history as he gets ready to head for Singapore?
Oh, he can learn to identify those issues that unite us as a country and to bring us together. Now, when we talk about trade policy, these are by their nature federal policies because they affect the entire country in one. And I hope and anticipate that he'll take those very things into account.
Speaking of trade, the president's getting a lot of pushback, including from some Republicans within his own party, particularly for how he's been negotiating with European allies on the issue of agriculture. I know that's a big issue in your state. What do you make of how the president's negotiating on trade?
You know, I respect any president whenever that president tries to improve our position relative to trade. I do have a lot of concerns with protectionist policies. I have a lot of concerns with the 232 tariffs imposed on imports of steel and aluminum, in part because we make a lot of things in the United States on a cross-border basis. In my state of Utah, for example, there are a lot of things that we make between Canada and Mexico and other countries that involve inputs that may be imported, but things that are manufactured in whole or in part in the United States. This could affect that and could restrict our ability to manufacture in the United States. That worries me.
Earlier this morning, the administration signaling that they might withdraw from NAFTA. Does that concern you at all?
Sure. Yeah. NAFTA has served us well in many, many respects. Now, it's not perfect, and so I don't fault anyone for trying to improve it. But whenever we get into a position where we might withdraw or we might prompt other countries to withdraw, that's a concern to me, especially given that NAFTA has increased the bar. It has raised the water level with regard to free trade, and I think free trade is a good thing.
You've raised these concerns with the administration. Do you get the sense that they're going to listen or that they're going to take into account and maybe recalibrate or renegotiate some of their positions as a result of some of the Republican pushback?
A lot of the pushback has included a message to, do not end the free trade practices that we've adopted. Do not do anything that could destroy NAFTA. And I hope and expect they'll take that into account. I mean, look, America's poor and middle class benefit to a particularly significant degree from free trade. The things that we buy are less expensive, and we have more job opportunities because of free trade. We need to be looking for ways to expand free trade, not retreat from it.
And one of the things you talk about in your book is George Mason, and how his relationship as a businessman, George Washington's neighbor, and how he is a really successful planter, helped to negotiate some of the interstate trade deals. I'm wondering what lessons we can draw on from George Mason in terms of trade as all of these intense trade negotiations are happening.
George Mason was a big believer in free trade and in the fact that in order for us to survive as a country, we couldn't have this sort of economic balkanization going on among the states. It's one of the reasons he voted against the Constitution at the end of the convention. He was afraid that Congress could too easily manipulate trade practices within the United States. Fortunately, of all the concerns raised at the Constitutional Convention, that one has not materialized, at least not in the way that he had feared. But I think Mason would look at today and want to make sure that we've maintained as free a trade policy as we possibly could.
See, this is really interesting because right now I think there's this internal debate within the Republican Party of free trade versus protectionist. And this tension that we're really just watching unfold right before our eyes. How do you sell your, advocate for your position on trade to folks who are living in the heartland, to folks who are living in rural communities, who voted for President Trump, but who feel left behind because of NAFTA, or who feel left behind as a result of these trade deals?
It's important to keep in mind that every one of us will pay lower prices on goods and services, basically everything we purchase in the economy, especially manufactured goods, as a result of free trade, and that we have a lot more job opportunities as a result of free trade. For every job in America that relies on steel and aluminum manufacturing itself within the United States, there are many, many, many times that in terms of jobs that involve manufacturing things using steel and aluminum as inputs, as fungible commodities on an international market scale. To produce things that in turn are sold outside the United States. So this produces a lot of jobs in this country.
Last question, you mentioned Section 232 and how the president's using the issue of national security to kind of negotiate these trade deals. Is that wise? I mean, should the president be using Section 232? Some of your Republican colleagues, including Chairman Hensarling, have really raised concerns about that being used as a tactic.
I disagree with his use of it. I think it's unwise, and this isn't anything I haven't spoken to the president about himself. In fact, I've spoken to him multiple times on this. I think it's the wrong tool to use, and I think it's the wrong policy to use.
Why?
There's no reason why this is necessary to protect American national security. We have more than enough steel and aluminum production capacity in the United States to more than satisfy all of our national security needs, to supply our military, for example, with what it needs. So I don't see any compelling national security reason to do this, and I see a whole host of economic reasons not to do it, especially because of the kind of retaliatory trade measures it can prompt.